My name is Daniel Mitchell, and at 32 years old, I never thought I'd be telling this story. Growing up, my siblings Brian and Kimberly were my whole world. We were inseparable, promising to always be there for each other's biggest moments. Yet when their wedding days came, I found myself excluded, deemed not good enough for their perfect celebrations. So when I proposed to my amazing fiancée Jessica, I made a decision that seemed only fair: they wouldn't be invited to our wedding. Their reaction? Complete outrage. The irony wasn't lost on me. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories about standing up for yourself after years of family betrayal. I grew up in a modest suburban neighborhood outside Boston with my brother Brian, who's 2 years younger, and my sister Kimberly, 4 years my junior. Our parents, Richard and Patricia Mitchell, were hardworking people who often pulled double shifts to provide for us. Dad worked as an insurance adjuster while Mom was a nurse at Massachusetts General. Their demanding schedules meant I often stepped into a caretaker role for my younger siblings. From the time I was 10, I was the one making sure Brian and Kimberly got ready for school, had breakfast, and caught the bus on time. I wasn't just their brother. I was the one who bandaged scraped knees and helped with science projects. I remember the day I taught Brian to ride a bike when he was 7. Dad had promised to do it that weekend, but an emergency at work called him away. Brian was heartbroken, so I spent the entire Saturday running alongside his wobbly bike until he could pedal on his own. The look of pride on his face when he finally balanced without my help, that's something I'll never forget. For Kimberly, I was the homework helper and confidant. Math was never her strong suit, so I'd sit with her at the kitchen table, patiently explaining fractions and decimals until the concepts clicked. She'd draw little thank you notes with stick figures of us solving giant math monsters together. I kept every single one of those drawings in a shoebox under my bed. Our family wasn't wealthy, but we managed to take annual camping trips to the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Those trips were sacred to us. Away from work calls and hospital shifts, our parents were fully present, and we felt like a complete family. One night, huddled around a campfire when I was 13, Brian 11, and Kimberly 9, we made a pact. With marshmallow sticky fingers intertwined, we promised to always be there for each other's major life moments. We sealed it by tossing pine cones into the fire, watching them spark and glow, a symbol of our bond that I thought would never break. Everything changed when I turned 14. The arguments started small: disagreements about bills, missed family dinners, conflicting work schedules. Within months, they escalated into full-blown shouting matches. The walls of our home seemed to thin overnight, unable to contain the growing resentment between our parents. During those darkest nights, my siblings would creep into my room, and we'd create a sanctuary of whispers and board games to drown out the chaos. I remember clearly when my school announced a week-long science trip to Washington, D.C. I'd been looking forward to it all year, had saved birthday money and lawn mowing earnings to afford it. But the permission slip deadline fell right in the middle of our parents' divorce proceedings. Seeing the uncertainty in Brian and Kimberly's eyes, I quietly put the form away. Some things were more important than a school trip. By 16, I was working part-time at a local hardware store after school. Christmas was approaching, and with our parents drowning in legal fees and separate rent payments, I knew the holiday would be sparse. I saved for 2 months to buy Brian the new Nintendo game he wanted and found Kimberly the art set she'd been eyeing at Michael's. Their surprised faces Christmas morning made the long hours worth every minute. When Brian graduated high school, he got accepted to Boston College with a partial scholarship. But the remaining tuition was steep. I had been saving for my own education at a state school, planning to study engineering. Without hesitation, I gave him my college fund, nearly $12,000 I'd saved from years of part-time work. "You're the smart one," I told him. "Make it count." He hugged me tight, promising to pay me back someday. I never expected him to, though. That's not what family is about. Kimberly's dance recitals became the highlight of my months. When Mom was scheduled for night shifts and Dad moved to an apartment 30 minutes away, I was often the only family member in the audience. I'd bring a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite, and sit front row, watching her graceful movements with the pride of both a brother and something of a parent. After each performance, we'd stop for ice cream, and I'd listen to her dissect every step and twirl with passionate detail. In our family den, we kept a shared dream board. Among various future hopes and goals, we each pinned wedding photos from magazines, formal suits, flowing gowns, elaborate cakes. "I'll be your best man," I promised Brian. "And I'll walk you down the aisle if Dad's being difficult," I told Kimberly. We'd plan hypothetical weddings with increasingly ridiculous themes, laughing until our sides hurt. Those dreams felt unbreakable. College separated us geographically but not emotionally, at least that's what I thought. I chose UMass Boston to stay close to home, while Brian went to Boston College and Kimberly eventually attended Northeastern. Despite busy schedules, I initiated Sunday dinners once a month. I'd cook something simple in my small apartment, and we'd catch up on classes, relationships, and future plans. Sometimes our parents would join separately, never together. I became the family glue, the neutral territory where everyone could still feel connected. Through my internship at a construction management firm, I helped Brian land his first real job in their marketing department. He had the business degree, but lacked connections. I put my reputation on the line, assuring my boss that my brother was hardworking and dedicated. Brian thrived there for 2 years before moving to a financial firm with better advancement opportunities. During Kimberly's senior year, she experienced a devastating breakup with her boyfriend of 3 years. I remember her tearful call at 2 in the morning. Without hesitation, I drove to her campus, bought her favorite comfort foods, and spent the weekend on her roommate's couch just to make sure she was okay. We stayed up talking through her heartbreak, and I reminded her of her strength and worth beyond any relationship. Those were the days when I never questioned my place in their lives. I was their big brother, their supporter, their emergency contact. Family meant showing up, and I always did. That's what made what happened later so incomprehensible to me. The call came on a Tuesday evening in early spring. I was fixing a leaky faucet in my apartment when Brian's name flashed across my phone screen. "I did it, Daniel. I asked Michelle to marry me, and she said yes." His voice bubbled with excitement. My heart swelled with genuine happiness. "That's amazing! Congratulations, man!" I knew she'd say yes. Michelle came from a wealthy family in Beacon Hill. They'd met at a charity gala where Brian was representing his investment firm. They'd been dating for just under 2 years, but I could tell she made him happy. At least I thought she did. "We need to celebrate," I said. "Dinner this weekend?" My treat. I was already mentally calculating how much I could afford to spend from my modest project manager salary. "Definitely," Brian replied. "And Daniel, I can't wait for you to be my best man." Those words meant everything to me. Our childhood promise would be fulfilled, and I'd stand beside my brother on his most important day. The first sign of trouble came at the dinner where I met Michelle's family. Her father, a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, barely acknowledged my handshake. Her mother asked what I did, and when I explained my work in construction management, she simply said, "How industrious," before turning to engage Brian in conversation about country club memberships. During the appetizers, Michelle's father asked where I'd gone to school. "UMass Boston," I answered proudly. I'd worked hard for my degree while supporting myself entirely. "Oh," he replied with a thin smile. "I don't think we know anyone from there." The conversation shifted to their family friends at Harvard and Yale. Still, I remained optimistic. This wasn't about her family. It was about supporting Brian. When they started planning, I offered to help however I could. Initially, Brian included me in venue visits and tastings. I noticed Michelle's slight grimace when I suggested a more affordable catering option, but brushed it aside. As weeks passed, I received fewer planning updates. Calls went unreturned. When I finally connected with Brian, He seemed distracted, mentioning changes to the wedding vision, without elaborating. The engagement party was held at Michelle's parents' country club, where I felt conspicuously out of place in my nicest blazer while others wore designer suits. Brian introduced me to only a handful of people, spending most of the evening with Michelle's crowd. I noticed other changes in my brother. He began dropping names of exclusive restaurants and vacation spots I could never afford to visit. Our monthly siblings' dinner became quarterly, then rarely happened at all. When I mentioned childhood memories, he'd shift uncomfortably, as if our modest upbringing embarrassed him now. The defining moment came at a dinner at an upscale Boston restaurant where Michelle and Brian invited several couples. When the bill came, everyone was expected to split it equally, over $200 per person. I hadn't ordered expensive items, conscious of my budget, but saying so would have created an awkward situation. I quietly put my credit card down, knowing it would take months to pay off. As we left, Brian pulled me aside. "Maybe next time dress a bit more appropriate?" he suggested, eyeing my button-down shirt that apparently wasn't designer enough. Michelle's friends noticed these things. A week later, my phone rang. It was Brian, his voice unnaturally formal. "About the wedding," he began hesitantly. "We've had to make some difficult decisions about the guest list. The venue has limited space, and Michelle's parents have a large network we need to accommodate." My stomach tightened. "What are you saying, Brian?" After an uncomfortable pause, he continued. "We won't be able to include you in the ceremony or reception. I'm really sorry, but it's just how things worked out." The room seemed to spin. "You're not inviting me to your wedding? Your own brother?" "It's not that I don't want you there," he said quickly. "It's just that Michelle's parents are paying for everything, and they have certain expectations about the guest list." "So her parents don't want me there? Is that it?" His silence was answer enough. "Brian, we promised each other. Since we were kids, we said we'd be there." "I know, but this is different. It's her day, and I need to respect her wishes. You understand, right?" But I didn't understand. Not then, not now. In the weeks that followed, I called repeatedly, trying to talk sense into him. Most calls went to voicemail. The few times he answered, the conversation went in circles, with increasingly thin excuses. The final blow came when I learned through our cousin that I was the only family member not invited. Our parents, distant aunts and uncles, even friends from high school had received invitations. Just not me. On Brian's wedding day, I sat alone in my apartment, blinds drawn. Against my better judgment, I checked Instagram. Photos appeared throughout the day: Brian in his tuxedo, the elaborate floral arrangements, the 5-tier cake. Then came the family photo that shattered me completely. Everyone stood smiling around the couple, our parents, Kimberly, extended family, with the caption, "Complete family celebration." Except it wasn't complete. I was deliberately erased. The physical pain of that betrayal was unlike anything I'd experienced. It felt like a hollow had been carved into my chest. I called in sick to work for a week, barely able to function, alternating between numbness and waves of grief. How could my own brother, who I'd supported unconditionally for years, decide I wasn't good enough for his perfect day? What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning of my exclusion from the family I'd worked so hard to preserve. 6 months after Brian's wedding, I was finally beginning to heal. I'd thrown myself into work, started therapy, and was slowly rebuilding my sense of self-worth. Then Kimberly called with her news. "Thomas proposed," she squealed over the phone. Thomas was her boyfriend of 14 months, an executive at a financial firm with family connections throughout Boston's elite circles. "I want you to help me find the perfect venue, Daniel. Your opinion means everything to me." Despite my experience with Brian, hope flickered. Maybe Kimberly remembered our promises. Maybe her loyalty ran deeper. The first few weeks of her engagement seemed to confirm my optimism. We toured venues together, discussed flower arrangements, and talked budget options. I felt included, valued, a stark contrast to Brian's wedding planning. Thomas and I want something elegant but not pretentious, she said during an early venue visit. I appreciated that sentiment, thinking perhaps she'd maintained her grounded perspective. Then came the dinner at Thomas's family home in Beacon Hill. The mansion had been in his family for generations, with views of Boston Common from the rooftop terrace. His parents, both old-money Bostonians, greeted me with rehearsed politeness that never reached their eyes. Daniel works in construction, Kimberly explained to them. Construction management, I gently corrected. I oversee commercial projects throughout the Northeast. How fascinating, Thomas's mother said without a hint of actual interest. Do you find that sort of work fulfilling? Throughout dinner, I noticed Kimberly laughing too loudly at their jokes, adopting mannerisms that weren't hers, dropping references to art exhibits and symphony performances she'd never mentioned to me. I barely recognized my sister beneath this carefully constructed veneer. Over the following month, Kimberly's vision for her wedding transformed dramatically. The reasonable budget ballroom became a historic mansion. The simple, elegant flowers became elaborate imported arrangements. The guest list expanded to include Boston's social elite, most of whom she'd never mentioned before. Her comments about my appearance began subtly. Maybe we could go shopping for a new suit, she suggested after one planning meeting. Something more current? What's wrong with my suits? I asked, genuinely confused. Nothing's wrong, she backpedaled. Just thought you might want something special for the wedding. But it didn't stop there. She began commenting on my haircut, suggesting expensive salons. She winced when I used certain phrases or talked about my job. Once, when I mentioned a funny story from our childhood camping trips, she quickly changed the subject when Thomas's friends joined our table. The exclusions started small. A bridal shower I wasn't told about until after it happened. It was just for women, Kimberly explained when I asked why I hadn't received an invitation to at least the co-ed portion. Then there was the bachelor/bachelorette weekend in the Hamptons. I thought you knew, she said when I saw the photos online. It was really last minute. And honestly, Daniel, it was pretty expensive. I didn't think you'd want to spend that kind of money. The final conversation happened at a small cafe near my apartment. Kimberly had suggested meeting for coffee, unusual since she typically avoided my neighborhood. Her designer handbag looked out of place among the casual lunch crowd. I need to talk to you about the wedding, she began, stirring her latte without meeting my eyes. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. What about it? Thomas's family is investing a lot in this wedding. They want everything perfect. Okay, I said cautiously. I'm happy to help however I can. She finally looked up, her expression a mixture of pity and determination. That's just it, Daniel. You're not. I mean, we don't think you'd fit with the image we're creating. The words hit like a physical blow. Image? What are you talking about? You're just not the image we're going for, she continued, her voice growing firmer. You're too unpredictable. Your clothes, your apartment, your job, it's not what Thomas's family expects. I'm your brother, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We promised each other, Kimberly. Since we were kids, we said we'd be there for the important moments. She sighed, impatience creeping into her expression. We were kids. This is real life. Maybe work on yourself and we can reconnect later. Work on myself? The hurt was transforming to anger. What exactly needs fixing, Kimberly? The fact that I didn't abandon our family when things got tough? That I gave up opportunities to be there for you and Brian? That I don't fit into your new fancy world? This is exactly what I mean, she hissed, glancing around to see if anyone was watching our exchange. You get emotional. You make scenes. Thomas's family would be uncomfortable. So I'm not invited to your wedding, I stated flatly. It's for the best, she replied, already gathering her things to leave. You'll understand someday when you're in different circles. In the months leading up to her wedding, Kimberly stopped taking my calls entirely. My texts went unanswered or received brief, formal replies. It was as if the sister I'd known my entire life had vanished, replaced by someone unrecognizable. The depression that followed was debilitating. I began seeing a therapist weekly, trying to understand how the siblings I'd sacrificed so much for could discard me so easily. My self-worth plummeted. I questioned every memory, wondering if I'd imagined the closeness we once shared. Christmas that year was particularly painful. I attended our parents' gathering out of obligation, where relatives casually mentioned both weddings, completely unaware of my exclusion or the pain it caused. Brian and his wife made a brief appearance, treating me with the distant politeness reserved for acquaintances rather than family. Most painful were the framed wedding photos prominently displayed in our parents' home. Brian surrounded by family, Kimberly's engagement announcement on the refrigerator, constant visual reminders of the moments I wasn't deemed worthy to witness. "Kimberly's wedding is going to be spectacular," my mother commented while serving dessert. "The Andersons have spared no expense." I simply nodded, wondering if anyone noticed or cared about the brother missing from these perfect family portraits. The 4th of July family gathering happened at my parents' house almost exactly 1 year after Kimberly's wedding. I debated not attending, but some misguided hope for reconciliation won out. Perhaps time had softened the hurt feelings on all sides. I arrived with a pasta salad and forced smile, only to find both my siblings and their spouses already comfortably settled in the backyard. Brian with his arm around Michelle, Kimberly leaning against Thomas near the grill. They acknowledged me with brief nods before resuming their conversations. Throughout the afternoon, wedding references permeated every discussion. Brian and Michelle were planning their 1-year anniversary trip to the Amalfi Coast. Kimberly and Thomas kept mentioning wedding gifts they were still receiving from their extensive registry. "Remember when the string quartet played during dinner?" Michelle asked the group. "Thomas's mother said it was the most elegant wedding she'd ever attended. The flowers alone cost more than some people's entire weddings," Kimberly added with a laugh. I sat silently, becoming increasingly invisible as the conversation continued. No one directed questions my way or attempted to include me. It was as if I existed in a parallel universe, present but unseen. After dinner, Brian pulled out his phone. "Who wants to see the professional wedding album?" They finally finished the leather-bound version. As family gathered around, he began scrolling through immaculate images, narrating each one. "It was perfect having everyone who matters there," he commented casually. "Couldn't have asked for a better day." I excused myself to use the bathroom, needing escape from the parade of exclusion. Locked inside, I leaned against the sink, surprised to find tears streaming down my face. I hadn't expected to still feel this raw, this wounded, after so much time. Then I heard them. Through the bathroom vent came voices from the adjacent guest room where Brian and Kimberly had apparently stepped away for a private conversation. "Good thing Daniel wasn't there." Brian's voice drifted clearly through the vent. "He would have embarrassed us in those cheap clothes." "Thomas's family would have been horrified," Kimberly agreed. "Best decision we made. Did you see what he brought today? Store-bought pasta salad. Can you imagine him at the Ritz?" Their laughter felt like knives. The siblings I'd protected, supported, and loved unconditionally were mocking me behind closed doors. The confirmation of their true feelings shattered any remaining illusions I harbored about our relationship. I splashed cold water on my face, took several deep breaths, and returned to the gathering with newfound clarity. This time, when Brian began showing another wedding slideshow on the living room television, I didn't sit quietly. "I have a question," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Why wasn't I invited to either of your weddings?" The room fell silent. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances while extended family suddenly became fascinated with their dessert plates. "Daniel, this isn't the time," Brian said dismissively. "When is the time? It's been over a year since you got married, nearly 6 months since Kimberly's wedding. Neither of you has ever properly explained why your own brother wasn't welcome." "We explained our reasons," Kimberly said tightly. "The venues had limited space." "That's not true, and you know it," I replied. "I just overheard your conversation in the guest room. You thought I would embarrass you with my cheap clothes. You were worried what Thomas's precious family would think. Their faces paled. Brian recovered first. You're completely misinterpreting what you heard. You're too sensitive about these things. You wouldn't understand the complexities of planning events at that level, Kimberly added condescendingly. There are social considerations. Social considerations more important than family? Than the brother who gave up his college fund for you, Brian? Who sat through every dance recital when our parents couldn't make it, Kimberly? My mother stepped between us. Daniel, that's enough. Don't ruin a nice family gathering. My father nodded in agreement. These things happen, son. Focus on the positive. As the family closed ranks around my siblings, my mother pulled me aside, whispering, just let it go. They have influential in-laws now. That was the final betrayal. Even my parents had chosen status over standing up for their excluded child. The family I'd fought so hard to preserve had revealed its true priorities, and I wasn't among them. The drive home that night nearly ended in disaster. About halfway to my apartment, I had to pull over because I couldn't see through my tears. I sat in a grocery store parking lot for almost an hour, surrounded by the ghosts of family memories that now felt like elaborate lies. Back in my apartment, I found myself surrounded by old family photos, camping trips, graduations, holidays. Moments when I believed we were unbreakable. I stayed up until dawn, examining each one, trying to pinpoint when things changed, when I became dispensable. As morning light filtered through my blinds, a realization crystallized with painful clarity. I had been the only one investing in these relationships. While I gave and sacrificed, they took and calculated. The love I thought was reciprocal had actually been conditional all along, dependent on my utility and, eventually, my social standing. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. From now on, I would prioritize my own happiness and set boundaries with those who had repeatedly shown they didn't value me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about self-preservation. I just didn't realize then how this decision would ultimately force my entire family to confront the consequences of their choices. The journey toward healing began with weekly therapy sessions. Dr. Levine helped me understand the unhealthy family dynamics I'd been trapped in for years. You became the family caretaker at a young age, she explained during one session. That created an imbalance where you gave constantly while expecting little in return. I thought that's what family does, I said. Healthy families have reciprocity. What you're describing is a one-sided relationship where your worth was measured by your usefulness. These insights were painful but necessary. I began recognizing patterns throughout my life. How I'd sacrifice my needs for siblings who rarely, if ever, did the same for me. How I'd internalized the belief that I needed to earn love through constant giving. With therapy providing clarity, I channeled my energy into personal development. At work, I threw myself into challenging projects, earning a promotion to senior project manager. The increased salary allowed me to move to a better apartment in a vibrant neighborhood closer to downtown Boston. For the first time, I decorated my space exactly as I wanted, not worrying about what my status-conscious siblings might think. I joined a recreational basketball league, meeting people who shared interests rather than bloodlines. Wednesday night games became a highlight of my week, followed by beers and conversation with teammates who accepted me without conditions or expectations. These new friendships, based on mutual respect rather than obligation, showed me what healthy relationships actually felt like. It was at my teammate Jake's housewarming party that I met Jessica. She was talking animatedly about her work as an elementary school art teacher, her passion evident in every gesture. When our conversation turned to family, I gave a sanitized version of my situation. To my surprise, she shared her own complicated family history. My dad left when I was 12, she explained. My mom raised 3 kids on a teacher's salary. We didn't have much, but we had loyalty. That's what matters, right? That simple statement, valuing loyalty over status or appearance, resonated deeply. Our first official date was at a casual neighborhood restaurant, where conversation flowed effortlessly for hours. Unlike my siblings' partners, Jessica asked thoughtful questions about my work, genuinely interested in construction management rather than dismissing it as beneath her. "I love that you build things that last," she said. "There's something so meaningful about creating spaces where people will live their lives." As our relationship developed, I met Jessica's family. Her mother Susan welcomed me with a warmth I barely recognized, insisting I take leftovers after dinner, because young men never keep enough food at home. Her brothers Mark and David immediately included me in their fantasy football league despite my limited knowledge of the sport. Their home wasn't fancy or impressive by my siblings' new standards, but it overflowed with authentic connection. "Come for Sunday dinner next week," Susan insisted after our first meeting. "I'm making pot roast, and I want to hear more about that hospital project you're working on." These Sunday dinners became sacred traditions. Jessica's family asked about my week, remembered details about my projects, and genuinely celebrated my successes. The contrast between how the two families treated me couldn't have been starker. One valued status and appearance, the other valued character and connection. Gradually, I reduced contact with my own family. I still called my parents occasionally and sent obligatory birthday texts to my siblings, but I stopped initiating gatherings or trying to repair relationships that the other parties didn't value. Instead, I focused on nurturing connections that brought joy rather than pain. 6 months into dating Jessica, we planned a weekend trip to Vermont. Surrounded by autumn foliage and crisp mountain air, I realized I wanted to build a life with this compassionate, authentic woman who loved me exactly as I was. The proposal happened a month later at the small Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. I'd arranged with the owner to have a special dessert brought out with the ring nestled beside it. When Jessica saw it, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said before I could even ask the question properly. 1,000 times yes. Her enthusiastic acceptance was followed by genuine excitement about planning our life together. Unlike my siblings' engagements, which quickly became about impressing others, Jessica and I talked about creating a celebration that reflected our values: meaningful, inclusive, and focused on love rather than spectacle. We met with a wedding planner, a friend of Jessica's who offered her services at a discount. Rachel helped us navigate venue options and catering choices within our modest budget. The question of guest lists arose naturally during our second planning meeting. "We should start compiling names," Rachel suggested. "Family first, then friends, then colleagues depending on your numbers." Jessica looked at me expectantly. "Your parents, obviously. What about Brian and Kimberly? Should we include their spouses too?" The moment hung between us. Until then, I hadn't given much thought to revenge or excluding them. The wedding was about celebrating our love, not settling old scores. But hearing their names triggered a cascade of painful memories: the overheard conversation, the deliberate exclusions, the years of feeling not good enough. "I need to think about that," I said carefully. Later that night, Jessica found me sitting on our small balcony, staring at the city lights. She wrapped a blanket around both of us against the autumn chill. "Talk to me," she said simply. I told her everything, not the abbreviated version I'd shared when we first met, but the full, painful story of my siblings' weddings and the years of emotional wounds. "They didn't just exclude me from their weddings," I explained. "They excluded me because they were ashamed of me. Because I wasn't fancy or wealthy enough for their new social circles." Jessica listened without interruption, her hand steady in mine. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I can't tell you what to do," she finally said. "But I believe our wedding day should be filled with people who truly love and support us. People who would stand by us even if we lost everything tomorrow." "Is that Brian and Kimberly?" Her question cut through my confusion with perfect clarity. Would my siblings stand by me through hardship? Their actions had already answered that question. "No," I said softly. "They wouldn't." "Then maybe that's your answer." It wasn't about revenge. It was about surrounding ourselves with authentic love on our most important day. For the first time, I felt completely at peace with establishing boundaries, even if they meant excluding the family members who had so easily excluded me. Jessica and I spent a weekend finalizing our guest list. We included my parents, believing they deserved a chance to support this marriage even if they'd failed to support me in the past. But after careful consideration, we decided not to invite Brian, Michelle, Kimberly, or Thomas. "Are you sure?" Jessica asked one last time before we sent the invitations. "I don't want you to regret this later." "I'm sure," I replied. "Our wedding should celebrate love and loyalty, not obligation. They've made their choices, and now I'm making mine." The invitations went out on a Tuesday. By Wednesday evening, my phone exploded with notifications. First came a text from Kimberly. "Is this some kind of joke? Where's our invitation?" I didn't respond immediately, knowing this conversation deserved careful handling. But before I could formulate a reply, Brian called. I answered after several deep breaths. "What the hell, Daniel?" he demanded without preamble. "Kimberly just told me we're not invited to your wedding. This has to be a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said calmly. "Jessica and I decided to invite only people who have supported our relationship." A stunned silence followed. "We're your family," he finally sputtered. "You have to invite us." "I don't actually have to do anything, Brian. You made that very clear when you excluded me from your wedding." "That was different," he insisted. "There were circumstances." "Yes, there were. You were ashamed of me. You thought I wasn't good enough for your wife's family. I overheard you saying as much at the 4th of July gathering. You're being childish." Brian's voice took on the condescending tone I'd grown to expect. "This is obviously some petty revenge." "It's not revenge. It's a boundary. I'm choosing to surround myself with people who value me, not people who mock my cheap clothes behind my back." The conversation ended with Brian threatening to fix this by talking to our parents. Within hours, a group text arrived from Kimberly to the entire family. "Daniel is excluding us from his wedding out of spite. This childish behavior is tearing our family apart. Please help him see reason." I didn't engage with the group chat, but individual messages from relatives started coming in. Most repeated the familiar refrain. "They're your siblings. Just be the bigger person." My parents called next, their voices strained with frustration. "Daniel, you need to reconsider," my father insisted. "They're your brother and sister. Were they being good siblings when they excluded me from their weddings?" I countered. "When they mocked me for not fitting into their new wealthy circles? That's in the past," my mother said dismissively. "You need to move forward." I am moving forward. By choosing to surround myself with people who actually care about me. Jessica witnessed these conversations, offering support without interfering. After a particularly difficult call with my mother, she sat beside me on the couch. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "I think so," I replied, surprised to find I actually meant it. For the first time, I'm standing up for myself instead of just accepting their treatment. It feels right. The pressure campaign escalated over the following weeks. Several relatives called to reason with me. Some were genuinely surprised when I explained my side of the story. They'd had no idea I'd been excluded from both weddings. 2 of my aunts and an uncle actually apologized for not noticing or speaking up at the time. "I had no idea, Daniel," my Aunt Margaret said. "I remember thinking it was odd you weren't in the wedding party, but I assumed you'd chosen not to participate. I should have asked." These conversations were healing in unexpected ways. For years, I'd carried the shame of exclusion alone, assuming everyone knew and condoned what had happened. Learning that many family members were unaware helped redistribute that burden. A week before the wedding, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Jessica and I exchanged concerned glances. We weren't expecting visitors. When I opened the door, Brian and Kimberly stood in the hallway, their expressions a mixture of determination and indignation. "We need to talk," Brian announced, already moving to enter without invitation. Reluctantly, I let them in. Jessica stayed beside me, her presence a silent source of strength. "This has gone on long enough," Kimberly began once we were seated in the living room. You've made your point. Now it's time to be mature and send us proper invitations. That's not going to happen, I said calmly. The guest list is finalized. You're doing this to get back at us, Brian accused. It's petty and embarrassing. I'm not doing anything to you, I corrected. I'm making a choice about my wedding day, just as you both made choices about yours. That was completely different, Kimberly insisted. We had legitimate reasons. So do I. What reasons? She demanded. Because you're still nursing some childish hurt feelings? Jessica, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Daniel's feelings aren't childish. You excluded your brother from the most important days of your lives because you were embarrassed by him. Because he didn't fit your image. That's not what family does. This isn't about you, Brian snapped at her. Actually, it's about both of us, I interjected. This is our wedding. We're choosing to celebrate with people who have shown us love and support. You're tearing the family apart, Kimberly said, tears welling in her eyes. I recognized the calculated emotion. She'd used the same technique to get her way since childhood. No, Jessica replied firmly. You already did that when you excluded him. After several more minutes of circular arguments, they left with parting threats to convince our parents to boycott the wedding entirely. Jessica and I sat in silence after the door closed. They really don't get it, do they? She finally said. They've never had to, I replied. They've always been able to hurt others without consequences. The night of our wedding rehearsal dinner brought another surprise. As our closest friends and family gathered at a local restaurant, Brian and Kimberly appeared unexpectedly, spouses in tow. We're family, Brian announced loudly. We belong here. Before I could respond, Jessica's brothers David and Mark approached them calmly. I think you misunderstood the invitation, David said pleasantly but firmly. This is a private event. We're his siblings, Kimberly protested. And we respect Daniel and Jessica's wishes, Mark added, guiding them toward the exit. Maybe another time. Their removal was handled with such polite efficiency that many guests didn't even notice the disruption. Jessica squeezed my hand under the table, and the evening continued beautifully. On our wedding morning, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from both siblings, alternating between demands and guilt trips. I silenced notifications and focused on the day ahead. Jessica and I had hired security for the venue, a precaution that seemed excessive until they actually had to turn my siblings away at the entrance. The ceremony itself was everything we'd hoped for, intimate, meaningful, and surrounded by genuine support. My parents did attend, albeit with obvious discomfort. During the reception, several guests commented on the palpable love in the room. You can feel how much everyone here cares about you both, my new mother-in-law remarked. Later that night, as friends posted photos of our celebration online, notifications revealed public comments from my siblings claiming they were hurt and blindsided by their exclusion. The family split into factions in the comment sections, those who knew the full story defending our choice, others condemning what they saw as an inexplicable slight. I closed the apps, unwilling to let digital drama intrude on our perfect day. As Jessica and I danced under string lights in the garden venue, I realized I felt no regret, only peace. For once, I had prioritized my own well-being over appeasing those who had repeatedly shown they didn't truly value me. Jessica and I spent 2 blissful weeks in Hawaii for our honeymoon, deliberately disconnected from family drama and social media. Swimming in turquoise waters and hiking through lush forests, we focused entirely on building our future rather than rehashing painful pasts. Upon our return, we discovered the digital firestorm had intensified in our absence. My siblings had taken their grievances public, sharing carefully edited versions of events that portrayed them as innocent victims of my inexplicable cruelty. Some distant relatives and mutual friends had taken sides without knowing the full story. Should we respond? Jessica asked as we scrolled through the comments. No, I decided after consideration. Engaging publicly would only escalate things. This needs to be handled privately. Instead, I reached out to my parents, suggesting dinner at a neutral restaurant rather than their home. They agreed, perhaps sensing this conversation was overdue. We met at a quiet Italian place halfway between our homes. After initial awkward pleasantries, I addressed the elephant in the room. I know you're upset about Brian and Kimberly not being invited to the wedding, I began. But I need you to understand why I made that decision. I explained everything, not just the wedding exclusions, but the years of one-sided relationships, the overheard mockery, the consistent message that I wasn't good enough for their new social circles. Did you know they both deliberately excluded me from their weddings? I asked my parents directly. My father looked down at his pasta. We knew about Brian's situation. Michelle's parents had concerns. Concerns about what? That I work in construction? That I don't come from money? We should have said something, my mother admitted quietly. We just didn't want to create conflict. But you're creating conflict now, pressuring me to include them when they excluded me. My father looked up, his expression troubled. I've been thinking about this a lot since your wedding. I should have stood up for you years ago. When Brian first told us you weren't invited, I should have refused to attend myself. That simple acknowledgement, that recognition of his failure to protect me, meant more than I could express. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I explained. I just want you to understand why I needed to set this boundary. We do understand, my mother said, reaching for my hand. We may not have handled it well, but we love you, Daniel. We want to be part of your life. That dinner marked the beginning of a slow healing process with my parents. They began making more effort, calling regularly, showing interest in my work and marriage, creating space for a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. A month after our return, I received an unexpected text from Brian. I've been thinking about what you said. Can we talk? We met at a coffee shop near my office. The conversation was stilted at first, both of us unsure how to bridge the chasm between us. Jessica seems nice, he offered finally. She is. The best thing that's ever happened to me. After several false starts, Brian sighed heavily. Look, I get why you didn't invite us. I probably wouldn't have invited me either. The admission surprised me. Really? What we did was wrong. He continued, staring into his coffee. At the time, it felt like I was just making Michelle happy, keeping peace with her family. I didn't think about how it would affect you. You chose her family's comfort over your brother's inclusion, I said simply. He nodded. I did. And then I had the nerve to be offended when you did exactly what I had done. The hypocrisy hit me pretty hard when I really thought about it. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was more self-awareness than I'd expected. We agreed to occasional lunches, a tentative rebuilding of brotherhood on new, more equal terms. Kimberly proved more resistant to reconciliation. She maintained a cold distance for several months, convinced she had done nothing wrong. Eventually, she reached out, suggesting coffee. To clear the air. Our meeting was less productive than my conversation with Brian. She acknowledged the hurt her actions had caused but struggled to take full responsibility. I was under a lot of pressure from Thomas's family, she explained. You don't understand how important appearances are in their world. I understand perfectly, I replied. You chose appearances over your brother. The question is whether you'd make the same choice today. She didn't answer directly, but the fact that she'd initiated contact suggested some desire to repair our relationship, however imperfect her understanding might be. As Thanksgiving approached, my parents extended an invitation with a specific condition. Everyone would behave respectfully. To my surprise, both Brian and Kimberly agreed to these terms. The gathering was tense but civil. My siblings' spouses were notably absent, a compromise that allowed us to focus on immediate family relationships without the added complexity of their influences. Small talk dominated the meal, everyone carefully avoiding potentially inflammatory topics. It wasn't the warm family reunion of childhood memories, but it was a start, a careful navigation of new boundaries and evolving relationships. These tentative steps toward reconciliation took an unexpected turn when Jessica and I announced her pregnancy 3 months later. The news seemed to shift family dynamics instantly, the prospect of a new generation offering everyone a chance to reconsider their priorities. Brian and Michelle sent a thoughtful gift basket with a note expressing genuine excitement about becoming an uncle and aunt. Kimberly called personally, her voice warmer than it had been in years. "I want to be a good aunt," she said. "I want to be part of your child's life." "I'd like that," I replied cautiously. "But it would require building a different kind of relationship than we've had these past few years." "I know," she acknowledged. "I'm willing to try if you are." The healing remains incomplete. Some wounds run too deep for perfect resolution. But each small step, each lunch with Brian, each civil family gathering, each acknowledgement of past hurts, contributes to a new foundation. As Jessica's pregnancy progressed, I found myself reflecting on the legacy I wanted to create for our child. I didn't want to pass down the patterns of conditional love and status-based worth that had damaged my own family. Instead, I committed to building a home where our child would never question their inherent value or need to earn our love through usefulness or achievement. The journey from exclusion to establishing boundaries taught me painful but necessary lessons. I learned that family isn't defined solely by blood but by consistent actions of love and support. I discovered that respect must be mutual and that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is step back from relationships that consistently diminish you. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. By refusing to accept treatment that devalued me, I created space for more authentic connections, including the beautiful family Jessica and I are now building. I've learned that respect must be mutual, love should be unconditional, and that sometimes the families we choose are more reliable than the ones we're born into. That's a lesson I'll carry with me always. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision about family boundaries? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve relationships that honor your worth, whether they're with family or friends.